Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
All right. Hey, Pete. Welcome back. Films and Stuff. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Ethan. How are you?
Everything is good. I had a late night last night since I went to see Morbius.
I feel kind of guilty because I did say I can't wait for you to see this movie.
Yep.
But that was me being cheeky because, spoiler alert, I was not a fan. And so I thought to myself, if I have to suffer through this movie, so does my good pal Ethan.
Well, the good thing is that Morbius is a 2-hour movie. It's not a 3-hour movie. So my suffering wasn't so bad. And to be honest, I don't think it was suffering. But before we get into our ratings, do you want to give our listeners a 60-second summary so that we're all up to speed?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So if you don't know, Morbius, classic Spider-Man villain from the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery. The movie starts with a flash forward / flash back. So it starts with a flash forward and then immediately goes into a flashback.
Not clear, yes.
Not clear. So we see a bit of a mixing of timelines in the same movie. Michael Morbius, who's Jared Leto, of course, stars.
Yes.
We start the movie in Costa Rica where he's trying to capture some bats. And then we go flashback to his origin in some kind of medical facility. We're not sure if he's an orphan or not, in London.
Yeah, it's like a children's hospital, right?
Right, exactly. Where we learned that he's got some kind of incurable blood disease. And he meets his adoptive brother there, who's got the same kind of disease as him. It's
Matt Smith. Matt Smith making a cameo, yeah.
And then we flash forward to current day where you now see a grown-up Jared Leto who is rejecting the Nobel Peace Prize for some reason. Or not Nobel Peace Prize, sorry. A Nobel Prize regardless.
Yeah.
And he's working with his girlfriend, Martine Bancroft, in some kind of lab where he's working on curing that same blood disease. Right?
Yep. Downtown Manhattan. Good office space.
Exactly. And from there, he finds a cure with those bats that he acquired in Costa Rica. But of course, due to Hollywood rules, he's not allowed to do the test in his safe lab in New York. He needs to test the cure in some rickety cargo container freight ship off the coast because it's illegal or something
in international waters off the coast of Rhode Island. Exactly. A very strange location, right? Not off the coast of New York, off the coast of Rhode Island.
Right. And he applies the cure to himself. He tests it and it does work, but in doing so it turns him into what they call a living vampire. What that means is that he can't control his urges to drink blood, right? So this is like the typical vampire that we see in all other pop culture. He tells his brother Milo that, he's been cured, but he can't control his urges. Milo says, well, damn it, I want the cure too. I don't care about the urges. Hijinks ensue. They fight each other for contrived reasons. He gets the cure. Milo gets the cure for himself. He becomes into a living vampire also. And then, we get a quick montage of all the different powers that both of them have. They fight. And in that fight, Jared Leto's girlfriend dies. Martine Bancroft, she dies. But does she? And using a coagulant of some kind developed by his girlfriend and by himself, Morbius is able to stop and kill his brother Milo. And that's the end of the movie until we get to the mid-credits scene where we, of course, see Michael Keaton's Vulture somehow show up, and that's the end of the movie.
So overall, you can see why it's a 2-hour movie. There's not a lot of characters, and there's not a lot of complex plot, really. It's a Dr. Michael Morbius, Jared Leto versus Matt Smith, best friend Milo kind of traditional battle, right? There's not a lot of complexity in that.
Not at all. Almost none.
So before we get into the breakdown, do you want to, Pete, should we give our rankings up front?
Absolutely. My ranking is a skip. My ranking is throw it away. Don't even waste your time if you see it for free.
Very, very unlike you to give a movie like this such a rating. I'm also at a skip. I went to see it in a theater. I don't think it's at all necessary. You can absolutely wait for it to come out, but if you don't see it at all, you are not going to be worse off for it. However, should we make a small disclaimer, Pete, which is this is based on what we saw in the mid-credit or the end credit scene. This is going to be Morbius is now within MCU.
Boo.
And this is not the last that we've heard of him. So to
Double
that end, if you've heard our summary, you're up to speed. You don't need to see it, but this is not the last that you've heard of Morbius.
Unfortunately, not.
Why bats?
So let's take a now that we've done the summary, maybe we take a deeper dive into why I think this was a terrible, 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 really awful movie.
Wow.
Really, really
Let it
bad.
go. Let it go, Pete. Let it go. Get it all out.
Like most movies of the last year or two, this movie was very badly hit by the pandemic.
Mm.
And if I remember correctly, they actually shot a majority of the film in maybe 2018, 19.
Oh, really?
Something like that.
Really?
Like that. Oh, yeah. This was definitely shot pre-pandemic.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and they've had... That's what makes this all the more unforgivable in my eyes. So you've now had a movie that's been more or less made for 3 years, which means that you've had 3 years of unfettered access to edit the movie, to spend time doing reshoots, to really get things to make sense, right? To really tie up any loose ends. And honestly, that mid-credit sequence where Michael Keaton somehow, because of the events of No Way Home, gets transported from Tom Holland's Spider-Man universe out into Jared Leto's and Tom Hardy's Venom universe makes no sense. Right? I don't understand why Michael Keaton left that universe, because they explicitly said, Doctor Strange explicitly explained that what's happening is anyone who knows who Peter Parker's true identity as Spider-Man is getting transported into the universe. So why would it work that Michael Keaton, who figured out that Tom Holland was Spider-Man, that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, why would he leave is the first thing.
Not clear.
The second thing is, fine, through whatever contrivance, he's left. Okay? Great. How does he know he's in a new universe? And more importantly, now that he's out of that prison cell, right? Once he's out of jail, how does he know who Morbius is, Michael Morbius is? Why does he think that it's a good idea for us to team up? What is this thing? Morbius has no relation one way or another to Spider-Man in this universe. We don't even know what this universe's Spider-Man is. So why it just...
There's a lot of I agree. There's especially at the end when you watch that credit sequence, my expectation is this credit sequence is expected to give you this little taste so that you're super excited about what's next. It's not intended to confuse what you've already seen and just muddy things up, right? And I think that's a problem, is that clearly they're somehow going to link Morbius and Michael Keaton Vulture, to Spider-Man. But it's not clear in which universe or why in that universe, right?
Right. And so this is a very ham-fisted, obvious way that they're trying to set up the Sinister Six, right? So Sony has been on some crazy, I can't even describe it, but it's kind of like they've got rabies, they're foaming at the mouth, and they have been desperate for 10 plus years since Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man to build up a Sinister Six universe. Like, they want to do their own quote-unquote Spiderverse, and they've been desperate to do that for whatever crazy reason, right? Okay, no problem. I'm on board. Here's the issue I have.
Are you on board?
On paper. But here's the issue we have. The issue we have is that, one, the Sony MCU team up with No Way Home beat them to the punch. They built No Way Home was effectively a Sinister Six movie. Even though it wasn't, it effectively was, right?
Yeah.
And they did a very good job with it. And two, they haven't built the groundwork to build a Sinister Six universe of their own. We don't know which Spider-Man it is. We don't know the other members of the Sinister Six. And we don't know what their motivation is. Like, why are you building the Sinister Six? Other than for, obviously, Sony wants to make a lot of money because, this multiverse concept, or this shared universe concept, rather, is a very successfully and financially rewarding thing. But DC has tried and failed. Sony is trying and is going to fail if they continue in this path. No one is willing to do the work that Marvel and Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau did, right? They said that this is a 20-year plan. This is not a 20-minute plan. We cannot make a shared universe out of 2 movies in 2 years. It's not possible.
So the Sinister Six, if Sony is building up to this, they're saying that they're going to create 6 villains to team up against the Tom Holland Spider-Man. And that's going to be
whoever Spider-Man is.
Yeah, and that's going to be Morbius, who we're not even sure is a bad guy, and certainly from what we've seen doesn't have any beef with Peter Parker as Spider-Man. In fact, Morbius kind of seems like a good guy.
Well, exactly. So here's that's the other problem I have, is that the 3 villains that Sony has introduced so far, right?
Yeah.
Where we have Morbius, Venom, and now I guess Vulture, right? Of the 3 villains that they've kind of put together for this Sinister Six revival of some sort, 2 of them,
they're not villains.
Sony has. 2 of them are anti-heroes, the way they've been presented. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. In the comics, Morbius
is almost a good guy. I mean, I agree.
Well, yeah, Venom he was amorphous, right?
Yeah, Venom is
also kind of like an anti-hero.
Yeah.
Really, Vulture is the only one who's like a defined bad guy in any universe that we've seen him in so far. Venom has been produced as presented as kind of like a semi-good guy, semi-bad guy. And Morbius also presented as kind of like a semi-good or a semi-bad guy. I don't know what we're going to see. I don't know how we're going to do it. But how do you then convert Tom Hardy, who is a fan favorite, right? Whether you like the movies or not, Tom Hardy as a person is a fan favorite.
A little bit of Tom versus Tom action.
And Venom, also a fan favorite, even though I'm not a fan of the movies. His movies did do very well, and they came off as an anti-hero. How do you sell me, the average Marvel fan, on seeing one of my good guys, Spider-Man, taking on another guy who's been presented as a decent guy, Venom? How do you sell that? Are you automatically going to say all of a sudden in the next movie Venom is going to be a bad guy? Like, sell it to me. And I don't see what they do with that.
I mean, I agree with that. I'm also not clear, how did Michael Keaton Okay, I understand he got transferred to jail in a new universe and that he'll somehow be released based on, what we heard in the background. How did he get his gear back? Like, how did he get his vulture wings and suit and
That's
mask?
another question, because that stuff was all built with Chitauri tech.
In a different universe, right?
Right, exactly. In the invasion of New York from the first Avengers movie.
Yeah.
So, you're saying the same thing I am. I'm probably just a little bit more angry about it. But you want to do these things, don't treat your audience members like idiots, right?
Yeah.
There's certain leaps of logic that we can all take, but this is a bridge too far, right? Like, how do you expect me to jump across the Grand Canyon that you presented here? I'm just not a fan, and especially when one of the other members we have seen in the Sinister Six, one of the other potential members of the Sinister Six was shown in the first Spider-Man Tom Holland movie, right? So I don't get it. I really don't get it. Not one of them. I don't remember if he's the Sinister Six member, but he could be. We saw Michael Mando,
Oh, yeah.
So he, for those of you who don't know, he is in Better Call Saul. He's one of the gang members in Better Call Saul. Yep. And he plays one of the bad guys who gets a very blink and you miss it cameo scene in the first Spider-Man movie, Homecoming. The first Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. Mm. And it's alluded to that he's going to become Shocker. Right? So fine. But we don't see where he is at the end of this movie. Did he also get transported? And again, if he did, he didn't know who Peter Parker was. How did he get transported? It's just all these little things.
Pete, I think the criticisms that we have of the mid-credit scene are absolutely legitimate. Absolutely legitimate. But I think we also agree that our disappointment with this movie started even before that, right? I mean, did you?
Yeah.
I mean, before we even got there, I think it probably put you in a sour mood. But what was your overall impression of just the movie? Were you happy with Jared Harris? Do you think I thought he had a very good performance. I just think that the story was just a little bit thin. And Bats.
You're absolutely right. We should separate the mid-credits. We should separate that.
Bats is Batman. Right.
So here's a maybe hot take.
I'm ready.
I think this movie stole a lot from Batman Begins.
Yeah, I agree.
There was a lot of the music was very reminiscent of Batman Begins.
Even the bats in this circular shape.
That's right. When he steps in after he gets the vampire gene in his blood.
Yes.
And he steps into that round glass cylinder that's filled with bats, and they kind of start swarming around him but leave him alone.
Yeah.
That reminded me exactly of that scene where a young Bruce Wayne falls down into the Batcave for the first time as a child. And he gets swarmed by the bats. And I was like, wait, is this a Batman movie? Is this a Morbius movie? What are we doing here? That for me was almost a scene for scene ripoff.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't have to be bats. Bats are associated so closely with Batman. We just came out of a pandemic that was based on bats. I mean, I felt like there was something else that they could have done. It didn't have to be bats,
Yeah, I was just, and even if it was going to be bats, fine. But it's, there was one sequence where you see him hanging kind of like an acrobat off of his legs upside down like a bat. That was more at least original, right? When he's fighting with, it's the sequence where he's fighting with his brother, with Milo.
Yeah.
And you see Morbius has kind of gotten his ass handed to him.
Yeah.
And he's been thrown up into the air and he lands awkwardly on this, almost like this bar. Yeah. And he hangs off of that bar using his knees as a fulcrum.
Yeah.
That to me was okay, There you go. Kind of, we know that bats hang upside down.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in the past. That was more, quote unquote, bat-ish. That's fine. We don't see Batman do that so often. Fine. But that one sequence, that one scene where he's standing in that bat tube, I didn't like it. I didn't like it because you're ripping off from a movie that instantly everyone's going to come.
Because he was saying, I feel like I'm, these aren't his words, but he was saying, like, I feel kindred with the bats. I'm one with the bats. I've got like something in common with the bats. And that was just, for me, Batman. Morbius was supposed to be like this something else, like some genetic freak or something else, right? And I felt like the way that he became Morbius, well, maybe it was kind of realistic. I didn't like that it was so related to bats, and I just felt the whole thing was, it was a very simple storyline, does experiments on himself, gives himself, some special powers, and that's it, I didn't find it was like very unique or interesting or even sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. And now let's go back to the first point you made. Jared Harris.
Yeah.
Great actor. Wonderful.
A lot of Jareds in this movie, huh? The two Jareds in Hollywood in the same movie.
Yeah. And really, I mean, when you think of like British gravitas, he's got it. He's one of the few modern day actors that's got that kind of gravitas, right? And so when he speaks, it's got like this like calm, careful demeanor, like everything that's thought out. And of course, this is just his, these are just scripted words, of course, but he delivers, right? Like there are very few instances. In fact, I can't even think of any where you think that, oh, well, Jared is just kind of phoning it in. Even in really bad movies like this one, he doesn't phone it in, right? He always gives it his all. Right.
I'd say though, he's too much. I mean, like in golf, you would say like that's too much club, right? I mean, he's definitely too much actor for
this movie,
for this role, right?
It just seems a little out of place to have someone so high caliber and then to misuse him or not use him at all, right? Yeah. And it just seems so weird that why would you want to waste that talent on screen? And I'm not saying that these guys aren't talented. Matt Smith, very good. Jared Leto has his moments. Unfortunately, he's 0 for 2 in superhero movies at the moment. So when you have someone like Jared Harris, use him. They didn't. And, he's used basically as the guy who introduces the protagonist, the antagonist, who needles the antagonist enough to cause him to kill him, and that's kind of it.
But there's also something that bothered me about this, and this is me picking apart the movie. When we meet Jared Harris, right, he's a doctor at what I understand is like a children's hospital in London. Then in the future, he somehow becomes Milo, Matt Smith, his like personal doctor in New York. I mean, it just seems like he's not, as a doctor for, children with blood disorders, he's not interested in just grabbing the money and running. It seems unlikely to me that he would say like, hey, you're giving me a better offer to move to New York and be your private doctor? Sure, I'll abandon my hospital and all these kids that need me, just to be your personal physician and give you personal blood transfusions. That's not a plot problem, but that's kind of a...
maybe a logic issue.
Yeah, it's a logic issue that I didn't really like. That I don't feel like that would really happen, and that bothered me. That they just needed kind of an excuse to get Jared Harris's character, in the second half of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessary.
I'm not 100% sure why they have him, but they do, and that's fine. Look, in a movie which had, I think you and I talked about this before we recorded, it has so few cast members that like even minor characters make it to, and by minor I mean like literally one scene and that's it. Characters make it to the head of the IMDb credits list,
number.
Right?
Finance bro.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't make sense, but that's fine.
So
that's fine.
what do you think of Morbius? I mean, this is a superhero movie, right? Whether or not Morbius is a hero or not is up subject to discretion. But what do you think of Morbius as a character? You know, like some people love Venom, some people don't like Venom, but Venom has a very, clear character. You know, what do you think of Morbius? Like, do you like him? Do you not like him? Where do you fall on him?
So
Like,
Morbius
as a character.
As a character in the comics, and so when I first encountered Morbius was actually not even in the comics. I encountered Morbius first in the Spider-Man animated cartoons of the 90s.
Oh.
For me, I always found it interesting that Morbius is a part of Spider-Man's rogues gallery when it kind of makes sense that he would be in Blade's rogues gallery, right? The famed vampire hunter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right? Like, I think just logically that makes a lot of sense. And then that's why, of course, you understand that there's been some team-ups between Spider-Man and Blade to get to Morbius. And, like, so that makes sense. I don't know why they'd want to have Morbius be the villain or a villain. There are other villains that I think they could have either rebooted or made their own version of that would have made more sense if they were going for a Sinister Six. Now, I was going to say that they could have done Kraven, but from what I understand and from what the rumors are, Kraven is going to be the next main bad guy in Spider-Man 4.
Okay.
So, fine. So the other ones that we haven't seen in this universe, or actually in any of the universes, I don't think we've seen Shocker.
Nope.
We've seen Electro, not Electro, Scorpion, kind of, but I'm not 100% sure. So I think that might be interesting. And again, if I've missed Shocker in any of the Spider-Man movies, fine, but that's how inconsequential he must have been. I've totally missed it. But in any case, Morbius, I guess they did it for whatever reason. As a character, he's not my favorite. His powers, we see that he's got like
what are his powers? He's got sonar. He's very athletic. I mean, where do you put
he
his...
He learns how to fly in that weird chase sequence. I didn't like the effects, by the way. Like, normally I'm a sucker for visual effects in any movie, whether it's superhero or not. Like, if a movie, even if it's bad, but if it's got good effects, I'll sit through the movie just to see the effects. So, like, Transformers, not great movie series, but I don't mind having it on in the background just so that I can hear the sound effects of the transforming, and so I can see the effects of, all the explosions. But here, like when he flies,
what did you think of the fight? What did you think of the fight scenes between Morbius and Matt Smith?
It was so weird. It was, how there was whenever he did anything vampire related,
tumbling.
How kind of there was not just tumbling, but how like his skin his skin and his being started like melting into the ethereal kind of thing. Like he started becoming dust. I can kind of get that. That's almost like maybe him trying to transform into a bat. But why would your clothes do that?
Yeah.
Right? Like his orange jumpsuit when he's arrested and he's in jail, that started melting away too. Like there were just something not quite.
I thought it was a very good effect. I mean, it was a very good try, but I agree. It didn't seem to match what was happening on screen in a real fight scene, And I agree. It just seemed like they had like all these rags wrapped around them, There's just like cloth and textiles
We're not articulating
everywhere.
this well. We're not articulating this well, but if you do catch it, I think you'll instantly understand what we're saying, which is we can't put our finger on it, but there's something that doesn't make sense or something that doesn't add up when it comes to the visual effects. And that's not to say they're bad. I'm just saying I just don't feel like they're super appropriate for what we're seeing.
I think the better effects were, they did a lot of their faces
Oh, yeah, the face changing. Yeah.
You know, their eyes, their faces, there was a lot of veins. Their teeth became very sharp.
Their mouths changed into that shape of like the snout of a bat.
Yeah.
Yeah. That, I think, was done more, quote unquote, well. And it was definitely seamless. There was that sequence where Matt Smith is walking down the street and he scares that guy with with his vampire face. Yeah. That, like, you know, things like that. It showed that, like, oh wow, you know, within the few hours of getting the serum, he's already able to control his powers to that extent, right?
You know, that's weird though, Pete, because if you think about how this played out, right? So Jared Leto was on this, as you mentioned, a very rickety ship, and it's not clear why they needed like a container ship. They probably could have used like a small yacht. But anyway, they use this big container ship, all rusty with a Panamanian flag. And he had to have like all these injections in his back, right?
Yeah.
And then he turned into Morbius, the creature. Whereas Matt Smith just seemed to have gone to the lab, chugged a bag of blood, and turned into the same thing. Is that right?
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, they didn't really go into great detail. Again, you know, these are the kinds of shortcuts that the average viewer, I don't think, cares about. But not
our listeners. They care, and I think they caught it. Yeah,
and that's the thing, right? That's exactly the point. The point is that
like your girlfriend's not going to notice this, but yes, when you're watching it, it's this little stuff that doesn't make sense.
When you are a Marvel fan, when you are a DC fan, when you're a superhero geek, these are the kinds of things that I'm not saying they have to look out for, but when they look out for it, we appreciate that, right? Yeah. And those are the kinds of points and callbacks that we remember. Yeah. I think one of the reasons for me, Endgame in Avengers was so it hits the right spots for me so much, is not just because, it was a good movie, it had a good plot, blah, blah, blah. But it had, one of the things the Russos did with that was they had callbacks to every one of the other 20 movies that preceded it. Right?
Funny callbacks as well. Like jokes that you would not laugh at unless you saw Ragnarok or something, right?
So, and what I'm saying is that they went out of their way to say, hey, you know what? We're going to give these small snippets that would otherwise just be small snippets, but we want to reward the Ethans. We want to reward the Petes who sat through the 20 years of watching these movies.
Well deserved.
And you know, and who are we to ask for anything? But it was just that small thing that make me say, hey, you know what? Thank you. That was really good, and it was really well appreciated that you would do that. You know, whether it's Falcon saying on your left, a reference to Captain America 2 from 15 years ago, from 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a small nod. It was so nice.
The eye,
Right?
So I totally agree with you. I mean, but that makes me ask you, did you laugh at all in this movie? Were there any jokes? Was there any levity?
No, I think remember. There was some forced levity. I think, you know, they had, so you've got Al Madrigal and Tyrese,
yes. Madrigal had at least like one line where he's kind of like, well, it happens, or it's a thing.
And it's kind of,
how many pints of blood could you drink? Like, how many could you drink? 36 beers, right? There must be more than one vampire out there. No one can drink that much blood.
Yeah. You know, Tyrese plays that role, which is like that hard-boiled detective who thinks there's a conspiracy going on. And I think Al Madrigal plays that role who's the detective who's kind of like us in the audience, who's kind of like pointing out things that are more obvious and not so obvious. You know,
but there was no jokes.
But they weren't.
But there was. And Jared Leto didn't say anything funny. Matt Smith didn't say anything funny. Jared Harris, bless his heart, has never said anything funny. Adria Arjona, right? Martine Bancroft didn't say anything funny. And can I make my rant of the day? Is that a segment?
Here's your segment, rant of the day.
I feel that it's really diminishing actresses where they just bring in someone like Adria, right, who's very pretty and probably very talented, and they just say, you be the girlfriend of Jared Leto, and just kind of sit in the corner and support him and hold his hand and say all the right things, and then at the end you're going to be injured or something and he's going to save you. I feel like that role is just so contrived and repeated again and again and again that it's just so recycled.
Condescending.
Yeah, I feel like it's very condescending. Say, look, you're young, you're pretty, just be the girlfriend, sexy doctor role, right? And they give her the title of doctor, specifically not nurse. They give her the title of doctor as though they're making her on like equal footing as Jared Leto. But to be honest, even in IMDb, Jared Leto's character credited as Dr. Michael Morbius. Adria, Martine Bancroft. Jared Harris, Dr. Emil Nicholas.
Yeah.
It really seems like they just kind of diminish and they recycle that female girlfriend of the main character. I don't like it, to be honest.
Yeah, they kind of like use her as the driving force to get from A to B.
Yes.
And in this case, A was how do you... Jared Leto, Morbius, who didn't want to fight Milo and who kind of runs away from all the battles because he was his brother and he doesn't want to fight him, only decides that he needs to turn around and do something after Milo goes after Martine and after Jared Harris, right?
It's just so contrived.
It's one of the oldest cliches, I think, in Hollywood. Yeah. And in today's day and age, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Even when you think back on like the original Superman with like Lois Lane, remember Lois Lane was like a very passionate, reporter, right? She was an investigative journalist. She was, right, the old Christopher Reeves Supermans. She was like the boss. And, Christopher Reeves, Clark Kent was kind of her intern, right? And she was
the mild-mannered photographer almost.
Right? And that's why it became such a sincere love story, because she was the strong one, the tough one, the driven woman journalist who had her own career and her own life, right? And then she was kind of rescued by, the person she thought was the underdog. Yeah? And you saw that, kind of play out together. And here it's kind of the opposite, where Jared Leto is obviously Dr. Michael Morbius, the head of the laboratory. Okay, there's another doctor working underneath him, and it's his girlfriend. Okay, this raises all sorts of sexual harassment issues. Not getting there,
lots
but
of HR issues. Yeah,
just saying. I mean, it's not that these issues need to be highlighted. It's that it's such a contrived relationship. It would be different if she had her own career and doing something else, and it was a love relationship. And I found that it's very banal, and I think that kind of summarizes this movie, which is it's just so copy and paste of other things that we've seen. Yet this is supposed to be a blockbuster, right? It's supposed to be a building block, as you mentioned, for what Sony wants to do. And it's like they were just stacking chips and not really looking at, the way that they're stacking them or what they're creating.
Yeah. Yeah. Now here's a hypothetical twist of the day.
Oh, bring it.
Maybe this is a segment we should talk about.
Bring it.
Look, I am a fan, as you'll know, of respecting source material.
You are.
I think that it's very important
True.
that if you want to do that, we've seen that in Halo, we've seen that in other comic book movies.
Yeah.
I just think that if you've got source material, you should respect it. And if you want to do twists that make sense, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you're looking at who, in my opinion, a B or even a C tier villain like Morbius, what if it was Bancroft that turned into the living vampire and not Jared Leto's character?
That is such a good idea. I agree. I totally agree.
This flies in the face of what me, as the guy who would always say, hey, listen, Morbius was this character. Why would you change genders? Why would you do this? But in this movie specifically, what if it was Adria Arjona's character, Martine Bancroft, who somehow accidentally, while trying to save Jared Leto on that ship, is the one who gets injected with the cure, and she becomes the living vampire. And then now you have a situation where Jared Leto has to fight his feelings, where his brother has turned evil, who's got the cure. He doesn't have a cure, and the love of his life has the cure, is the vampire, and they have to battle each other.
Much better. It's a much better storyline. Here, the storyline is a little bit
a little on the nose, right? A little.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a little obvious.
The Milo character, you have a lot of sympathy for him because you see that he was bullied as a child, right? He grew up, I don't know if he had a disability. I mean, he had a blood disorder. He was a person of determination, right? And you have this sympathy for him. Why do you have to lose that sympathy by when he finally has an opportunity to become healthy, he becomes an asshole? He didn't just say like, hey, you know what? I'm happy to take this, this serum and just be healthy and be an athlete and go out on dates and live a normal life. We'd be like, God bless him. Finally that guy, overcame his things. He still has our compassion. Instead, he became an asshole. He's killing people. He's damaging people. Then he loses all that goodwill and all that sympathy that he's built up for us, over the course of the film and over the course of what we've seen from his childhood to his adulthood. No need for that. And that's the kind of mental leap that this film is asking us to have that really doesn't sit right with me. So now Jared Leto, right? So Michael Morbius, who was best friends with Milo for their whole lives and said, hey, we're like the Spartans, two of us versus everyone else in this world. Now they're fighting each other because they both had blood disorders. They were both going to die premature deaths. They were both always, the underappreciated, underdog orphans. And now one of them's turned into a big jerk and the other one's, got this potential cure for their affliction that he's not willing to share or even modify so it's a little bit safer or more usable for them, right? The whole thing just flies in the face of what you'd want out of characters. So I agree. When you say Martine should have had a different role, I agree. Something should have happened other than making it the most contrived. Best friends suddenly turn against each other because one enjoyed the power trip and the other was trying to, save people.
Because, by the end of the movie anyway, she turns into this vampire, right? Or it's
Does
alluded to that. Well, that's the thing is, right? There's the illusion is made that she's going to be a vampire in this next film or whatever they're going to end up doing or not doing, right? Because she gets killed by Milo in that attack. And then you kind of, it's implied that she's not dead, right?
Well, so Jared, the way that I remember it, tell me if this is right. Jared goes up to her and he sees her kind of dead on the ground and he does the holding her and are you okay and stay with me, help is on the way. And then does he kiss her or she bites him? Someone bit someone's lip and that's implied that speck of blood then infected her. Is that right?
That's the feeling that I got.
I mean, how do they bring in Michael Keaton in full gear? I mean, there's no mystery to that at all. There's no kind of suspense. It just straight up bring him in full gear and he says, hey, let's team up against Spider-Man. No suspense at all. And then Martine Bancroft is not sure if she's dead. She bit him. She got bit. She's a vampire. She's not. It seems like they're putting the stuff that they want to market in my face, and the important film details that I want to know, they're playing coy and trying to hide it, so I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
And why does she die on the disco floor on the top floor of that skyscraper? That's kind of weird, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Why is there a disco floor?
it just so many things upset me about this movie in the sense that it's lazy because you have the opportunity, and we've seen it with other universes, right? We've seen it with Marvel, that if you take a character that no one knows about or even maybe particularly likes, right? Like Ant-Man, nobody was like, he's infamous within the MCU because everyone, when they first announced Ant-Man, everyone was like, why?
Why?
What the hell?
Yeah.
Ant-Man is terrible. This
He's
is
so
horrible,
small.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, he's so small.
And one movie, all it took was one movie with dedication, with the right writers, with the right director, with the right actor, and Paul Rudd turned it into a franchise, right? They're making the third movie now. He played a pivotal role in the Avengers. He's the guy who everyone likes. Whether he's the best or not is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if he's the best superhero or not. Everyone loves him.
Yeah.
And it's a character that otherwise, on paper, everyone is just like, what a jerk, right? And nobody wants to be involved with this guy. Sony could have done the same thing with Morbius. They really could have done the same thing in Morbius.
I mean, Paul Rudd, despite the best efforts of Michael Douglas, Paul Rudd made that an amazing movie. I have to say, I really love Ant-Man. That's a very good point, which is, I was almost going to say, but you cut off my, not you cut off my point, you undermined my point before I even made it, which was, I was going to say, are there too many superheroes and it's just not possible to create another good storyline or another compelling hero? And you just did the opposite, which is saying, hey, remember when Ant-Man came out, no one was excited. Like, Ant-Man, it's a small little guy. How can this be a superhero? How can you be excited about him? And it turned out that with a very good script and a very good actor and a very good cast, you create something that, again, despite Michael Douglas trying to be all weird and undermine it, it turned into a really, really great, endearing film. And now he's an Avenger, right? And he's a very important Avenger.
Yep.
So,
and I sneakingly suspect, by the way, that that's the same thing we're going to see with Moon Knight, right? And even more so with Moon Knight.
yeah.
Ant-Man, everyone kind of, or most people were kind of aware, maybe not the most clear picture in their mind, but Moon Knight, even fewer people know Moon Knight, right? Or anything about Moon Knight. And I think that given the time, given the perseverance, given the script, I think that we're going to, by the end of, the 6-episode run of Moon Knight, I expect that Moon Knight is going to be elevated into an upper echelon of, at least maybe not the A-list of the, Avengers level style, but I imagine by the end of this TV series, people are going to hope to see him in movies, right?
Yeah, I mean, is that Oscar Isaac, or is that the character? Or is it because the series has been pretty good so far?
Well, I think it's one and the same, right? I think it's a combination of all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But that's interesting because Moon Knight is a television series, right? And Morbius is a film. Which one do you think is easier to kind of create the baseline for the character? In some ways, it's the film. I mean, I could make an argument for both. I think I can take both sides of this argument. I could say,
I think so too.
The film, you've got people for 2.5 hours. You can put the whole story there in one piece and make it compelling. The series, you've got more time. You can spread it along and you can really build up and focus on the details rather than trying to cram all this backstory into a flashback scene. Yeah,
I think it's tough to say it's tough to apply it to Morbius, but I think a TV series allows you to take a character and really build them up block by block. And a movie, on the other hand, the movie gives you that opportunity, like you said, to kind of make a big splash.
Yeah. And I feel like the movie gets more, just because there's a lot of television right now. There's not a lot of film. Like when you go to the cinema, I mean, we were just there, each of us in the past 2 days. How many movie posters did you walk past? how many trailers, and you're like, I've got to see that next week or next month. There's not a lot.
Hardly any at the moment.
So I'd say right now, if you made Moon Knight a movie, you'd probably get a lot of people going to it. One, because it's a Marvel movie, and two, because there's not a lot out there right now. Whereas when you make it a television series, good golly. I mean, we're on how many different platforms? We got how many different things to watch? We've got to watch when the next episode's coming out. Did we miss it? Is it, binging, not binging? Do we get caught up on other things? I think it's harder to get someone's attention if it's a series, actually.
Yeah.
But if you stick with it, the payoff should be higher because, like you said, you can do, as you're fond of saying, the slow burn.
So to reiterate, Morbius is a skip?
It's a skip. I say that with a heavy heart. It's a skip. Sometimes I really enjoy saying it. This time I get no joy out of saying it. I think Jared Leto did a great job. I'm not sure how he did his body transformation. At one point I saw him super skinny. At one point I saw him relatively buff. I like all the cast members, to be honest. I can't say anything negative about any of those folks. I thought Tyrese was super great. Al Madrigal, super great. Michael Keaton, always like Michael Keaton, even though I don't really understand how he fit into this. But the whole thing was just kind of like not compelling for me.
I'm not so...
But we're stuck with it. We're stuck with it. It's clearly linked to Spider-Man. It could not be more obvious. And maybe they even knew that they made a bad movie, so they had to make the mid-credit scene like pretty in your face, which is like, hey, like it or not, you're kind of stuck with us now. We're definitely going to be part of Spider-Man.
And I think this is Morbius is one of the movies that Sony is making without the guidance of the MCU, without the guidance of Disney Marvel, right?
Yeah.
So any Spider-Man movie now, starting with Homecoming with Tom Holland, any pure Spider-Man movie is made with Disney's and more specifically Marvel's creative control. And Sony collaborates, but really Sony is basically there to just fund half the movie and keep its mouth shut and let Marvel play with their toys. Morbius and Venom, for example, are the movies that Sony gets to make without any creative control by Marvel. Right? And you can kind of see that, right? It becomes very obvious. A, the Spider-Man movies are very well integrated into the MCU. And B, the Spider-Man movies are infinitely superior to the Sony movies, right? Even Venom, which did very well, not critically, but financially. Critically, I don't know how well it did critically, but financially did very well.
Yeah.
You can't compare the two. They're terrible movies. I did not like any of the Venom movies. And the same goes for Morbius. And so this is going to set up some kind of showdown, and I don't know how they're going to do it, where I think Sony is going to be like, all right, well, we're going to use James Garfield and Tobey Maguire because they're our Spider-Man from back in the day. And you guys can use Tom Holland's Spider-Man for your own universe. And we're going to make a Sinister Six movie of our own with Tobey Maguire or with Andrew Garfield or with both of them.
Well, we'll find out, Sony Pictures. Thanks for giving me a mid-credit scene that showed me exactly what I can expect. Obviously, there's going to be a big standoff. So I'm excited to see Tom and Tom go against each other. And let's see where Michael Keaton, who used to be Batman, now teaming up with a vampire. Weird. Where he falls into this.
Well, let's see. Let's see how things go. Oh, and speaking of Michael Keaton's Batman, by the way, the Flash movie, right, which was supposed to bring all the Batman, that's in danger now.
Why?
Oh, I don't know if you heard, but last week, Ezra Miller was arrested and then had a restraining order placed on him while he was vacationing in Hawaii.
For what?
So Ezra Miller now has a history of being like a belligerent jerk.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Like he got into a bar fight while he was shooting some movie in Europe sometime 2 summers ago.
No way.
And then he got into some kind of like verbal argument and sparring in
He looks
Hawaii.
so mild-mannered. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they also got arrested, or then in Hawaii, they had a restraining order slapped on them.
Wow.
So apparently,
So they were filming The Flash? Is that how it was going?
So no, I don't know if they were filming The Flash in Hawaii. I think they were just there on holiday or something like that. What's interesting is that they were staying at a hostel.
Okay.
Which, I don't know, didn't make sense to me. That's what I heard. And in any case, rumors on the grapevine are that Warner Brothers have held like an emergency meeting to see what they need to do, if anything, with The Flash. Apparently, all of Ezra Miller's projects at Warner Brothers are frozen at the moment.
Whoa.
Because I guess the studio does not want to be associated with someone, at least someone who is one of their main superheroes, to be, a jerk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
right.
if this is true, I think what could potentially happen is that they release The Flash, and then at the end of the movie or at the next movie, they cast someone else. And of course, because of him being able to, because the Flash is able to go back in time and change things, they can always use that as a way to explain a new character or a new person, right? Because the Flash in the comics has been Barry Allen, it's been Wally West. There have been so many different iterations that it could be a different version.
Yeah,
so we've seen
for
Barry Allen in the DCEU.
Yeah. I have to say, I think for the Flash, Warner's probably in a good place where, in our mind, Ezra Miller is not so ingrained with the Flash that he can't be separated. So now it's probably
that he can't
the time.
be eliminated.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't mean that in a Hitman way. I mean that in a casting way.
Yeah. Warner may mean it that way. Yeah. But yeah. I think it's right though. I mean, we've seen this with Tom Holland, who's such a great advocate, and has so much, goodwill just with his, his personality and his genuineness.
Yeah, super enthusiastic. Yeah. Exactly.
And even the same thing for Superman. Yeah, I mean,
Henry Cavill.
If you're gonna put 10, 15 years into the franchise, you've really got to have someone. It's just like a franchise quarterback in the NFL or starting pitcher in baseball or a point guard in basketball. You better have someone that you can really count on for that decade.
Let's see how things go with Spider-Man.
I think let's see how things go with Spider-Man. So if our listeners want to stay tuned, let's also do summaries of what we've done in the last week for Halo, Winning Time, and Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. Yep.
Get caught up and up to speed.
Perfect. But until then,
stay with us, everybody, and have a great week.
Have a good week.
All right, we're talking about Halo. Give us a summary of episodes 2 and 3 that we watched this week.
All right. Episode 2, Master Chief. We see him go travel to visit his friend with Quan. When he arrives, he learns about the relic and its link to a super weapon of some kind. He leaves Quan, the girl, with his friend Soren at this unknown location and promptly goes back home to the UNSC where he gets arrested. In episode 3, we learn about Cortana and it gets installed, the artificial intelligence gets installed into Master Chief as a way of controlling him. With Cortana's help, Master Chief learns about his home planet where he was born and raised and the existence of a second relic, which could also lead to the location of this super weapon. And at the end of the episode, Master Chief and Halsey leave the UNSC to go visit the home planet to find that second relic.
And we also see the starts of the cracks between Master Chief and his team, where there starts to be a little bit of skepticism and doubt in terms of whether Master Chief is still the same reliable Spartan that they always view him as.
That's right.
Okay, Pete, we're talking about winning time. Give us a summary of episodes 4 and 5 that we watched this week.
Absolutely. So, episode 4 was a deeper dive on Jack McKinney, the newly hired coach to the Los Angeles Lakers. Here, we really only see a coaching montage. We learned that, he's a straight shooter, no-nonsense guy. And he wants to change the way the Lakers play their game from that of the stodgy, slow-paced game to one that's much more street ball-like, which is faster and up-tempo.
Yeah.
Exactly. Episode 5, we take a deeper dive on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We learn about his history and his opinions on not just his teammates, but on life and the way he fits into that life. We see the things that help him change his attitude, whether that's the altercation he has with Magic Johnson, or whether that's, him reminiscing with his friends in the league. And finally, we end the episode learning that Coach Jack McKinney, who's off to a blistering start in the NBA, gets injured on a bike ride. And that's how we actually end the episode.
Yeah, a lot of suspense leading into episode 6.
Exactly.
Okay, Pete, we're talking about Moon Knight. Please give our listeners a summary of what they may have missed in episodes 1 and 2.
Okay, so episode 1 of Moon Knight, the pilot for Marvel's latest superhero series, introduces us to Stephen Grant, a man who seems to have some kind of disorder with sleep, some kind of OCD potentially. We don't know much. Throughout the course of the episode, we learned that he potentially has some kind of multiple personality disorder, but we're not 100% sure until he wakes up in the middle of what appears to be a heist, and he steals an artifact, or at least his alter ego steals an artifact, and they go through a daring mountain escape. And at the end of the episode, we learn more that Steven does in fact have an alter ego. His name is Mark Spector, and we finally get to see Moon Knight, the superhero, for the first time.
So we've got Stephen Grant, Mark Spector, and Moon Knight, all the same person.
Exactly. And
a lot of names to keep straight.
And in the second episode, we learn more not just about Mark Spector, but we also learn about the characters around him and his objective. We meet Layla, who we find out is Mark's wife. And we also learn more about Arthur Harrow, who is set out as the potential antagonist to the series,
played by Ethan Hawke. Yeah,
and we meet him in the first episode, but we learn more about what his goals are. He believes in some kind of pre-crime Minority Report style justice. Stephen has a fight with Mark over controlling his own body. But by the end of the episode, even though he's able to take control, he ends up giving control to Mark. Mark decides to keep control because he has a mission to complete. And that mission takes him, at the end of the episode, to Egypt.
Poor Stephen. Battling for his own body with Mark Spector.
That's right.
Finding out that he's got a wife and he's got his protagonist, or his antagonist, in Ethan Hawke's Arthur Harrow.
If you're interested in hearing more about our views on each show, listen to our individual recap and reviews for each show now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.